The trunk was too heavy for what a young lord claimed it held. That was the whole of it at the start. Not a gasp, not a shout, not some grand unmasking under the palace lamps. Only a strap of oxblood leather biting into the shoulder of a porter, and a guardsman named Corwin Ashvale watching the man's knees fold half a finger's width under a load that a trunk of linens and gifts had no business carrying. I have told this story to my own sons since, and they always want me to begin with the locket. But the locket came later. The story begins with weight, and with a young guardsman who had learned to trust his own hands more than any lord's word. I am Sergeant Havard Greywater, and I stood the north colonnade of Harrogate that morning, third in a line of 6, close enough to see everything and too far to do anything but watch a thing become bigger than any of us. Understand this before I go on. What Corwin did was not brave in the way the ballads mean it. It was worse than brave. It was correct. And in the kingdom of Eldermore, in the household of King Alaric, being correct about the wrong person was the fastest way a man of the guard could end his career, his freedom, or worse. The morning had the ordinary bones of a departure. Lord Cassius, the Queen Consort's son by her first husband, a man of perhaps 26 who wore his birth like a coat 2 sizes too grand, was leaving the palace for his estate in the Eastern March. His carriages had been drawn up in the outer court since dawn. Trunks, hat boxes, a caged pair of hunting hawks, 3 servants he treated as furniture, and a temper he treated as a virtue. Departures were guard business by long custom, because everything that left the palace crossed a threshold, and everything that crossed the threshold was checked. Not out of suspicion of anyone's soul, out of the plain old law of the household, written in a ledger older than the king, that said, "What belongs to the crown stays with the crown, and the gate keeps the count." Corwin Ashvale had the gate that morning. He was the youngest of us who could be trusted with it, 24, lean as a lathe, with a way of standing so still that tourists at the outer rail sometimes wagered coins on whether he was a living man or a painted one. He had come up from the river districts, the son of a lockmaster who tended the canal gates, and he had inherited from his father a single stubborn conviction that would shape everything, that a gate is only as honest as the man who keeps it, and that a count you do not keep is a count you have already lost. I watched him work the line. He was polite, he was quick, he touched a hat box and passed it. He lifted the lid of a chest of riding gear, saw boots and spurs and a currycomb, and closed it again with a small courteous nod to the servant beside it. This is the part people forget when they imagine the guard as a wall of muscle and pride. The best of us are not walls. They are clerks with steel, men who count, who compare a thing to the memory of a thing, who feel the difference between a trunk of linen and a trunk of something else the way a fisherman feels the difference between weed and a fish on his line. The oxblood trunk came forth. 2 porters carried it, and both of them were laboring. One had a sheen on his brow, though the morning was cool. Corwin raised a gloved hand, not sharply, only the flat, ordinary gesture that means set it down, and they set it down, and the sound it made on the cobbles was wrong. A trunk of folded linen makes a soft, breathing thump. This trunk landed with a low, dense knock, the sound a thing makes when there is metal in it, or stone, or something that does not fold. Lord Cassius was already 3 strides past, halfway to his carriage, his mind plainly on the road and the wine at the far end of it. He heard the trunk stop, and turned with the particular slowness of a man who has never once in his life had to hurry for another person. "Is there a difficulty, guardsman?" "No difficulty, my lord." Corwin's voice was even. "The count only." "I'll want the lid." I saw it then, though from 30 feet, the flicker across the young lord's face. It was not the flush of a man insulted. Insult is loud and comes fast and burns off. This was quieter, and it came slower, and it went deeper, and I had been a guard long enough to know the difference the way Corwin knew the difference between linen and lead. This was the face of a man who has just felt a floor he believed solid shift under one heel. "The lid," Cassius repeated, as if the word were foreign. You want the lid of my private trunk, off here in the court. The gate keeps the count, my lord. Every trunk, every departure. It's the old order, not mine to set aside. I am the Queen Consort's son. Yes, my lord. Corwin did not move. The order doesn't name the traveler. Only the trunk. Understand what Corwin refused. Most men, hearing I am the Queen Consort's son, would have found a reason. A trunk of linen, my lord, forgive me, carry on. The count would have shown a checkmark that meant nothing, and no ballad would ever have been sung, because the safest count in any palace is the one that never troubles the powerful. Cassius knew this. He was not truly angry that a guard wanted to look. He was angry that this particular guard, on this particular morning, was not going to find him a reason. Do you know, Cassius said, and now his voice had gone silk soft, which in a man like him is the sound a knife makes coming out of a sheath. How many guardsmen I could have turned out of this palace by supper over the years, had I troubled myself to. I do not trouble myself. I find the whole business of you tedious, but I will trouble myself over a man who makes me stand in a courtyard while he paws through my linen. Then I'll be quick, my lord. Cassius looked at him a long moment. Around us the outer court had gone quiet in the way courts do when the servants sense a storm and busy their hands to have somewhere safe to put their eyes. The hawks shifted in their cage. A stable boy froze with a bucket. And I, 3 from the end of the colonnade, did the only thing my post allowed, which was to be certain, very certain, that if Corwin needed me I could cross the court in 9 strides, and to hate, quietly, that 9 strides might not be quick enough for what a lord's favor could do to a young man's life. Very well, Cassius said and smiled, and that smile was the second wrong thing of the morning. A man with linen in his trunk does not smile when the guard opens it. He sighs, he complains, he taps his foot. He does not smile. Only a man who has decided to win a different way smiles like that. Open it. And when you find my grandmother's table linen, and a set of silver combs, and nothing else on this earth, guardsman, you and I will have a conversation about your future that you will remember for the rest of it. Corwin knelt. He worked the 2 brass catches. The lid came up. I was too far to see in. But I saw Corwin's face, and I have never forgotten it, because a young man's face doing a hard thing well is one of the finest sights this life offers, and I have seen it only a handful of times. He did not gasp. He did not look up in triumph. His jaw set, and something went still behind his eyes that had not been still before, and I understood that the trunk had not been empty of wrong, and that Corwin now knew it, and that from this second forward the morning belonged to a different and far more dangerous story than a count at a gate. He reached in. He moved something aside, folded cloth. I would learn, the linen the Lord had promised, laid neat on top like a lid over a well. And from beneath it, from a nest of that same cloth in the bottom corner, he lifted out an object no bigger than a hen's egg. And even at 30 feet, even in the flat morning light, I saw it catch and throw a small hard gleam of gold. Cassius stopped smiling. That, Corwin said, and his voice had changed. It was not louder. It was heavier, the way a man's voice goes when he has stopped being a clerk and become a witness. My lord, what is this? Put it back. The silk was gone. Put it back in the trunk now. I can't do that, my lord. It is a trinket, a keepsake. It is mine. No, my lord. Corwin rose to his feet and he held the gold thing up, not high, not to shame, held it the way you hold a wounded bird, close to the chest, careful. I've stood the funeral watch. I know this. Every guard who stood that watch knows this. This is the late Queen Isolde's locket. It was laid in her coffin. I saw it laid there myself. And that was when the court, which had been holding its breath, let it out all at once in a sound like wind through a reed bed, and a departure became the beginning of the end of the Queen Consort's long, quiet theft. Let me go back an hour, because you cannot understand the weight of that gold egg in Corwin's hand unless you understand whose it had been. Queen Isolde had died 4 winters before the morning I am describing. She was the king's first wife, the mother of Crown Prince Rowan, and though I am a guard and it is not my place to love or mourn the royal I keep, I will say plainly that the whole of the North Wing loved her, and that when she died a light in the palace went out that the years since had not relit. She had been a slight, quick, watchful woman with a low laugh and a habit of learning the names of the guard's children. She knew mine. She once sent a physician to my daughter through a fever without being asked, and told no one, and when I tried to thank her she pretended she had no idea what I meant. That was Isolde. She did her kindnesses like a thief in reverse, sneaking good into the house and denying it to your face. Her locket was famous in the way small things become famous inside a great house. It was old, her mother's, and her mother's before that, a line of women going back further than the house of Harrogate itself. Oval, gold, worn smooth at the edges by 3 centuries of thumbs, and on the front, engraved fine as frost, a heron standing in reeds, the old sigil of her mother's house. She wore it every day of her life that I served her. And when she died, King Alaric, a slow man and a proud one, but not in his grief, a fool, decreed that the locket be laid in her coffin and buried with her, because it was hers and only hers and should follow her out of the world. The whole guard stood the watch. I stood it. Corwin stood it, a raw recruit then, his first solemn duty, and he told me years later that he had stared at that locket on her still breast for 6 hours in the cold cathedral, and had thought, in the strange way the mind wanders on a long watch, that it looked like a small gold door, and that he hoped it opened onto somewhere kind. So understand, the locket was in the ground. The whole realm knew it was in the ground. It had been in the ground for 4 years. And now it was in Corwin Ashvale's white glove, in the outer court of Harrogate, having come out of Lord Cassius's travel trunk under a fold of table linen. There are only a few ways a buried thing gets unburied, and none of them are innocent, and every soul in that courtyard did the arithmetic in the same held breath. Either the coffin had been opened, and the thought of that, of hands prying at Isolde's rest, turned my stomach then and turns it now, or the locket had never gone into the ground at all, and something false had been laid in its place, and the whole realm had wept over a lie. I did not know which was worse. I only knew that Corwin, kneeling clerk of a gate, had just pulled a loose thread that ran up out of that trunk and into the deepest, darkest corner of the palace, and that whoever had wound that thread would not let it be pulled without a fight. Cassius recovered faster than I expected. That was the thing about him I had underestimated, and would go on underestimating to my cost. Under the vanity there was a quick and frightened cunning, the cunning of a man who has never earned a thing, and has therefore become expert at not losing what he has been given. "You foolish boy," he said, and his voice had found a new register, reasonable, almost kind, the voice a man uses on a horse he means to bridle. "That is not the Queen's locket. It is a copy. My mother had it made a keepsake, a mourning piece to remember her by. Half the ladies of the court have such things. You are holding a jeweler's fancy and telling this whole yard it's a relic torn from a grave. Do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand the accusation you are making, and against whom?" It was well done, quick and plausible, and it gave every frightened servant in that court a door they could walk through. Oh, a copy, of course, a copy, back into the safe mourning where lords are obeyed and guards keep their eyes down. Half the men I have served with would have taken that door themselves. Corwin turned the locket over in his glove. "A copy," he said slowly. "A copy. Then it won't be worn smooth." Corwin ran his thumb across the gold. "A new-made piece has sharp engraving, my lord, crisp lines. This heron's near rubbed to a ghost. 300 years of thumbs did that. No jeweler in the realm could fake 300 years in 4. He raised his eyes, and they were not a young man's eyes anymore. "And there's a nick on the rim, left side below the hinge. She caught it on a door latch the winter before she died. I was on the door when it happened. I heard it scratch. It's here. My lord, this is not a copy. This is hers. And I think you know it is, because a man carrying a copy does not tell his porters it's linen, and does not tell his guard to put it back, and does not go the color you have just gone. Silence, the kind that is weight. And then Lord Cassius made the mistake that undid him, though it would take 3 days and a great deal of blood-cold courage to finish the undoing. He looked for half a heartbeat up and to his left, toward the tall windows of the private apartments, toward the wing where his mother, the Queen Consort, kept her rooms, the way a boy looks toward the house when he has broken something in the yard. It was the smallest thing, but I saw it, and Corwin saw it, and I believe in that half-heartbeat we both understood that the trunk had never been the crime. The trunk was only the cart. The crime lived in that upper window, and had for 4 years, and had just felt a guardsman's hand close around its loose thread. "Send for the watch officer," Corwin said, not to Cassius but to the court at large, in the clear carrying voice of a man invoking the order that stood above every lord. "And seal this trunk. Nothing leaves, nothing returns to it. Nothing is touched." He looked at the porters, who had gone gray. "You'll both stand here. You're witnesses now, not servants. The law will want what your hands remember." The watch officer that season was Captain Bracken Thorn, a broad, slow-blinking man with 28 years on his back and a deep dislike of anything that complicated his morning. He came at a heavy trot from the gatehouse, took one look at the gold thing in Corwin's glove and the color of Lord Cassius's face, and I watched instinct war with caution behind his eyes. The instinct said, "Something is badly wrong here." The caution said, "That is the Queen Consort's son, and you are a man with a pension." "Ashvale," Thorn's voice was careful. "Report." "Trunk 4, my lord's baggage, cleared for departure." Corwin's report was flat and exact, the way we are trained. Weight inconsistent with the declared contents. I opened it understanding order. Beneath a fold of linen I found this. He held it out on his open palm, not passing it, only showing. "I believe it to be the late Queen Isolde's locket, buried with her 4 winters past. I stood her funeral watch. I know the piece. Lord Cassius states it is a copy commissioned by the Queen Consort. I do not believe him, and I've told the court my reasons. I've sealed the trunk and held the porters as witnesses. I request the watch take custody of the locket, the trunk, and my report, and refer the matter above my station." It was, I have always thought, a small masterpiece, that report. Corwin made no accusation Thorn could be blamed for hearing. He described what he had found and what he believed and what the law required, and handed the whole hot coal up the chain exactly as the order demanded, so that no man could say the young guardsman had overreached. He had understood, faster than I did, that the danger was not in being wrong. The danger was in being right and clumsy, in giving Cassius, or the power behind Cassius, a single thread of procedure to pull, a single door back into the safe morning. So he gave them none. He did everything by the book, and held the book up between himself and the storm like a shield. Cassius saw the shield for what it was. "Captain Thorn," he said, warm now man to man, "this is absurd. This boy has decided, on the strength of a funeral he half remembers, to detain the Queen Consort's son in a public court over a mourning keepsake. I will have his name. I will have it now. And you will hand me my property and my apology, and we will let this diseased fancy die where it stands before it embarrasses everyone who's forced to repeat it." And there it was, the moment the whole thing balanced on. Thorn could take the door. He could say, "Of course, my lord, a misunderstanding. Ashvale is young. Here is your keepsake, safe travels." And the locket would go back into the trunk and out the gate and into the eastern march and out of the world, and Isolde's grave would keep whatever lie was in it, and a young guardsman would be quietly ruined by autumn for the crime of counting honestly. I saw Thorn's throat move. I saw the pension win the first round. "My lord," Thorn began, in the tone of a man reaching for the door, "I'm sure there's no need for—" "Captain," a new voice, level, young, and carrying the particular weight that only one kind of man carries. Crown Prince Rowan had come into the court. I do not know how long he had been there. That was ever his way. He moved through the palace like weather, present before you noticed the change in the air. He was 29 that year, dark like his mother, with her same low steadiness and her same trick of watching a room before he spoke into it. He had come down, I would learn, to see his stepbrother off, a courtesy the two of them performed without warmth, the way you shake a cold hand, and had arrived at the colonnade in time to hear the words the late Queen Isolde's locket said in a young guard's voice. He did not look at Cassius. He looked at Corwin, and then he looked at the gold thing on Corwin's palm, and I watched the crown prince of Eldermore go the color of old ash, because whatever the rest of us suspected, he knew. He had knelt at that coffin. He had watched that locket lowered into the dark with his mother. And he was looking at it now in the flat morning light, 4 years later in the outer court, in his stepbrother's baggage. "Say it again, guardsman," Rowan said quietly, "the piece, where you last saw it." "In your lady mother's coffin, Highness." Corwin's voice did not shake, though I do not know how. "I stood the watch. It was laid on her breast. The king ordered it buried with her. I saw the lid closed. And the nick on the rim." Corwin's eyes flicked up, surprised. "Left side, Highness, below the hinge." Rowan crossed the court. He was not a large man, but the yard seemed to shrink around him. He stopped before Corwin and looked down at the locket without touching it, and I saw his jaw work. And I will not pretend I did not. A grief 4 years buried come up into a prince's face and be mastered, hard, in front of his men, because that is what they are raised to do, and it is a terrible thing to raise a boy to. "She caught it on the latch of the blue solar," Rowan said, very low to no one, to the locket. "The winter she was ill, I was there. She laughed about it, said she'd worn it so long it had learned to be clumsy with her." He lifted his eyes to Cassius, and now the color came back into his face all at once, and it was not ash. It was something with heat behind it, banked and controlled, and far more frightening than any shout. "Brother, explain to me how my mother's locket, which my father the king ordered into the ground, and which I watched go into the ground, is in your travel trunk." Cassius had gone very still. He was, I think, recalculating at speed, feeling the floor tilt further, understanding that the door back to the safe morning had just been shut and bolted by the one man in the realm who could not be told a keepsake was a copy. He tried anyway. He was that kind of man. He would try a lock long after the key had broken off in it. "Rowan, it's a copy. My mother had it." "My mother's locket," Rowan said, "had a lock of my grandmother's hair inside it and a portrait she painted herself when she was 17, and she never let it be copied, not once, because she said a thing worn every day for a lifetime cannot be copied, only imitated, and she despised imitation." He held out his hand, palm up, to Corwin, not to Cassius. "Guardsman, may I?" "Highness." Corwin laid it in the prince's hand as gently as a man returns a sleeping bird to a nest. Rowan turned it in his fingers, found the catch, and there, in the middle of the outer court, with the hawks shifting and the porters gray and the whole household holding its breath, the crown prince of Eldermore opened his dead mother's locket. I could not see inside from where I stood. I did not need to. I saw his face. Whatever was in it, hair, portrait, emptiness, I never learned and never asked. It took the last color from him and then gave it all back as fury, cold and total and quiet. He closed the locket. He closed his hand around it. And when he spoke, it was not to Cassius and not to Thorn and not to the court. It was to Corwin Ashvale, in a voice pitched for the whole yard to hear and remember. "What is your name, guardsman?" "Corwin Ashvale, Highness, North Gate." "Ashvale?" Rowan's eyes did not leave his. "You have done, this morning, a thing that every man in this court but you would have found a reason not to do. You will not be punished for it. Hear me, all of you, mark this. The man who kept the count honestly this morning is under my protection from this hour. Anyone who moves against him, anyone moves against me." He turned at last to his stepbrother, and his voice dropped, and it was the worse for dropping. "Cassius, you will come with me, not to a carriage, to the king." "Rowan, you cannot possibly." "Captain Thorn." Rowan did not raise his voice. "You will hold Lord Cassius under guard, comfortably and with courtesy, in the east receiving room until my father sends for him. You will seal that trunk with the watch's own seal and set 2 men on it. You will take guardsman Ashvale's report in writing, witnessed, and you will make 3 copies, and you will bring me all 3. Is any part of that beyond you?" Thorn, who had reached for the door and been caught with his hand on the latch, snapped straight as a raw recruit. "No, Highness." "Good." Rowan looked once more at the locket in his fist, and something crossed his face that I can only call the shadow of a boy at a graveside. "Someone opened her grave," he said, so quietly I doubt Cassius even heard it. "Or she was never in it whole, and someone in this house has known for 4 years and let me grieve a lie." He drew a breath. "I am going to find out which, and I am going to find out who. And God help them when I do." He walked out of the court with his stepbrother Pale at his shoulder and 2 of Thorn's men behind, and left the morning in pieces on the cobbles, and left Corwin Ashvale standing at the north gate with the eyes of the whole household on him, and the weight of everything to come already settling onto shoulders far too young for it. That was the first day. I want to tell you the rest went quickly, that a prince's fury is a straight road, and Cassius confessed by nightfall. It was not. Fury is not proof, and a prince is not a court, and the person who had wound that thread had wound it for 4 patient years, and was not a woman to unwind at the first pull. Because by evening, the story the court told itself had already begun to turn. I heard the first turn of it in the guardroom that night, from a man named Deverell, who had it from a footman who had it from a maid of the Queen Consort's household. The tale had grown a new shape in the space of 10 hours. In the new shape, a young guardsman with a grudge and an ambition had insulted the Queen Consort's grieving son over a mourning piece she had lovingly commissioned, had made a public spectacle of a private sorrow, had held a lord in a courtyard on a whim. The crown prince, distracted by old grief, had been provoked into an overreaction he would regret. And the Queen Consort, poor, wronged Queen Consort, was said to be prostrate with distress that a keepsake made to honor a dead rival should be twisted into an accusation of grave robbing against her own blood. It was a good lie, and it told you everything about the woman we were up against. Her lies were never crude. They did not deny the facts, they redressed them. Yes, there was a locket. Yes, it came out of Cassius's trunk. Yes, the guard found it. She did not fight the facts. She fought their meaning fast with the whole apparatus of a great household to spread her version, while ours was still one young man's word and one prince's grief. "They'll break him," Deverell said, meaning Corwin, staring into his cup. "You watch. By the equinox he'll be posted to some marsh fort counting frogs, and everyone will have decided he was an overreaching boy who made a mess. The prince can protect him for a week. He can't protect him from a story." I did not answer, because I had served long enough to know Deverell was very likely right, and because I had already decided, sitting there in the guardroom with my own cup going cold, that I was not going to let it happen. I did not know yet what it would cost. If I had, I like to think I would still have chosen the same. I like to think it. A man tells himself many kind things at this distance. The summons came for me the next morning, not from the Queen Consort, but from the Crown Prince, and it came the way his summonses always did, a page appearing at my elbow with a folded card, no crest on the outside, only my name in a hand I did not recognize. Sergeant Havard Greywater. I turned it over. Inside 3 words, the Blue Solar. The Blue Solar was Isolde's old sitting room, high in the north wing, unused since her death, kept dusted by a household that could not quite bring itself to close it and could not quite bring itself to enter it. I had not been inside in 4 years. When I came to the door I found it open, and Corwin already there, standing stiff by the cold hearth, and the Crown Prince at the window with the locket in his hand, turning it in the gray light off the courtyard below. "Sergeant Greywater," Rowan said without turning, "you watched the whole of it yesterday from the colonnade. Ashvale tells me you did not move, but you were ready to, that you counted 9 strides. 8, Highness, if I'd had to." That earned the ghost of something that was not a smile. He turned. He looked older than the day before, in the way grief that has been reopened ages a man overnight. I have brought you both here because I need men I can trust who are not my own household, and the guard is the only body in this palace that owes its oath to the crown and not to person in it. My father's servants answer to my father, who does not yet believe me. My stepmother's servants answer to my stepmother, who is the reason I need you. The court answers to whoever is winning. You answer to the order. So he set the locket on the mantle, gently, as if it might wake. Tell me how a thing gets out of a grave. I glanced at Corwin. He was staring at the locket, and I could see him thinking, in that lockmaster's son way of his, working the problem like a stuck gate. There are only two doors, Highness, Corwin said slowly. Either the grave was opened and the locket taken out after the burial, or it never went into the grave at all, and the locket we all watched go into the coffin was already false, swapped before the lid closed. Two doors. They lead to two different crimes and two different people, and the whole matter turns on which one it came through. Explain. The first door. Someone some night in the last 4 years went into the royal crypt, broke the seal on your lady mother's tomb, opened her coffin and took the locket off her. A hard, ugly, dangerous crime. It needs men and time and access, and it leaves marks. A broken seal, disturbed stone, mason's dust. We can look. If it happened, the crypt will tell us. And the other door. Worse in its way, though cleaner. If a copy was made, the real one kept back and the false one buried in its place, then the crime happened on the day of the funeral in plain sight, and it needed only one thing. Corwin's eyes came up. Someone close enough to the coffin, in the hours before the lid was sealed, to make the swap. Someone whose hands on the late Queen's body would raise no alarm. Someone whose grief was a costume. The room was very quiet. Below in the courtyard, a horse stamped, and a distant voice called the changing of a watch. My stepmother, Rowan said, helped lay out my mother's body. It was thought a great kindness at the time. The reconciling of two wives, one living, one dead. My father wept at it. She washed my mother's hands and folded them. She had the locket in her fingers to place it. I stood 10 feet away and thought, God forgive me, I thought it was gracious. He shut his eyes. I thought it was gracious. We don't know yet, Highness, Corwin said quietly. That's the second door. We need to know which door it is before we say a name, because if we accuse and we're wrong about the door, the whole thing collapses and takes us with it. The Queen Consort's people are already telling the court it was a mourning copy. If we say grave robbing and the crypt is untouched, we've proved her story for her. If we say swap at the funeral and there's no way to prove a swap, it's our word against a grieving widow's. He drew a breath. We have to check the first door first. The crypt. Because the crypt can be looked at and stone doesn't lie, and if the seal is broken we'll know, and if it's whole we'll know the swap door is the only one left open. Either way we learn something true, and true is the only thing that beats Her Highness. She's better at every other kind of fight. I watched the Crown Prince look at a gate guard with the expression of a man who has found a tool far finer than he expected in his hand, and I felt an old pride I had no right to. I had not made Corwin. His lockmaster father and his own stubborn honesty had. But I had stood beside him at the gate 3 years, and a man takes what pride he can. Then we go to the crypt, Rowan said. Tonight, quietly. The 3 of us and the crypt warden, no one else. If the seal is broken, we'll have our answer and I'll take it to my father whether he wants it or not. If it's whole. If it's whole, Highness, Corwin said, then we know it was the funeral and we go looking for the copy. Because if she buried a copy, she paid a jeweler to make it. And a jeweler is a man, and men keep records and take money and can be found. Rowan almost smiled again. You think like an investigator, Ashvale, not a guard. My father kept the canal gates, Highness. A gate that leaks and a lie that leaks are the same problem. You find the leak by following the water back to where it shouldn't be. We went to the crypt at the dead middle of the night, when the palace sleeps, and even the schemers rest. down the long cold stair beneath the old chapel where the house of Harrogate keeps its dead. The crypt warden was an ancient man named Ferris who had tended the tombs longer than I had been alive, and he wept quietly when the crown prince told him in a whisper what we had come to see, because Ferris had loved Isolde too. Everyone allowed near her had, and the thought of her rest disturbed struck him like a blow. Rowan carried a shielded lantern. Corwin carried nothing but his eyes. We came to Isolde's tomb, a plain white marble thing in a niche of its own, her name and dates and the heron of her mother's house cut into the face, and we all three stood a moment in a silence that had nothing to do with strategy. Then Corwin stepped forward and did the thing he had come to do, and did it the way his father would have inspected a gate, slowly, methodically, letting the stone speak. "The seal," he murmured. Ferris had shown him before we came what an untouched tomb seal looked like, a band of dark mortar around the joint of the facing stone, stamped while wet with the crypt's own iron seal, a heron in a circle, so that a broken seal shows a broken bird. Corwin ran the lantern light along the joint an inch at a time, around the top, down the left side, along the bottom, up the right. I held my breath the whole way. "Highness," Corwin said at last, and his voice was strange. "Bring the light closer, here, the lower right corner." Rowan brought it. We all three bent to the stone. And there, in the band of dark mortar at the lower right, where the seal heron should have stood whole and unbroken, the bird was there. But the mortar around it was a shade lighter than the rest, and finer and newer. And when Corwin touched it with a fingernail, a crumb of it came away that should not have come away from 4-year-old work. "It's been resealed," Corwin whispered. "Someone opened this tomb and sealed it again. They matched the seal, they had a copy of the crypt's iron, or they made one, but they couldn't match 4 years of age in the mortar. This corner's newer than the rest. Ferris." He looked up. "When was this tomb last opened by the crypt's own record?" The old warden's hands were shaking. "Never, my lord, not since the burial. There is no record. There cannot be a record. No one has requested entry. No one could enter without my key, and the watch's seal both, and I have given neither, not once, not to any soul, so help me." His voice cracked. "So help me, someone came into my crypt in the dark and opened her, and I never knew. The first door was open after all, and it was so much worse than the second." Rowan straightened slowly. In the lantern light his face had gone past fury into something colder and more final, the face of a man who has stopped hoping he is wrong. "So it was not a swap at the funeral," he said. "It was worse. Someone came down here in the dark and opened my mother's rest and took the locket off her body and sealed the stone back so cleverly that only a lockmaster's son on his knees with a lantern would ever have known." He looked at the resealed corner as though he could see through it. "How long ago, Ashvale? Can the stone tell you that?" "Not exactly, Highness. Mortar cures for weeks and ages for years. This is old, months at least, likely more. It's not last week's work. Whoever did this did it a good while ago and has been sitting on the locket since, waiting." Corwin frowned. "Which raises a question. If they took it months or years ago, why was it in Lord Cassius's trunk yesterday? Why move it now?" "Because," I said, and it was the first thing I had contributed all night, and it came to me cold and certain out of 30 years of watching how the powerful behave. "She was getting it out of the palace. Highness, forgive me, but think on it. A stolen thing kept in the palace is a danger every day it's here. Any search, any accident, any honest guard at a gate could turn it up. If she'd meant only to have it, to gloat over it, she'd have kept it hidden in her own rooms where no one dares search. But she put it in her son's trunk, bound for the eastern march, out of the palace, out of reach, out of the count. She wasn't hiding it anymore. She was disposing of it, getting it far away, to be melted, or sold, or buried again somewhere no prince would ever kneel. And your gate guard caught it on the very last morning it would ever have been catchable." The silence that followed had a texture to it. Corwin was staring at me. Rowan was staring at the tomb, and I understood, saying it aloud, how narrow the thing had been, how the whole crime had come within one honest count of vanishing forever into the eastern dark. "One morning," Rowan said softly, "one guard, one honest count." He looked at Corwin with something I had not seen a prince give a common man before. "A day later that trunk is in the march, and that locket is a lump of gold in a fire, and I go to my grave believing my mother rests whole, and the woman who opened her tomb pours my father his evening wine for 20 years. He drew a slow breath. "You held the gate, Ashvale. On the one morning in 4 years it needed holding. I will not forget it. We sealed the crypt again ourselves, the 4 of us, Ferris weeping over his own broken trust, and climbed back up into a palace that did not yet know its floor had cracked. And as we climbed, Rowan gave his orders in a low, fast voice, and I understood that the quiet part of this was ending, and the dangerous part was about to begin. "We know the door now," he said. "The grave, that's proof of a crime, a true, provable, terrible crime. But it isn't yet proof of who. A resealed tomb doesn't sign its name. My stepmother will say, 'Yes, how dreadful, a grave was robbed, some thief, how does that touch me?' She'll turn even this. So we need the hand, not just the deed. We need to put the locket, the tomb, and her together in a way no redressing can undo." He stopped on the stair and looked back down at us, the lantern throwing his shadow huge on the old stone. "Ashvale said it. Follow the water back to where it shouldn't be. Someone made a copy of the crypt's iron seal. Someone opened a royal tomb, that takes a mason, or men who can move a facing stone. Someone made, perhaps, a false locket to leave behind, if she left one. We must check whether the coffin is empty or holds a copy. God help me. Every one of those is a man who was paid. Every payment is a thread. And I have spent my whole life being told my stepmother is too clever to leave a thread." His jaw set. "I have never believed it. A person who does this much cannot do all of it alone. Somewhere there is a paid man. Find me the paid man, and I will hang her scheme around her neck where the whole realm can see it." That was the true beginning of the hunt, and the first thread we pulled nearly got Corwin Ashvale killed. We began with the seal, because the seal was the thing that could not have been improvised. Anyone bold enough might move a stone in the dark. But to reseal the tomb with the crypt's own heron in a circle mark, matched close enough to fool everyone for months, that took a copy of an iron the size of a man's palm, an iron that existed in exactly one form in the whole kingdom, hanging on one hook in Ferris's warden's lodge, never leaving his sight. "It's never left this hook," Ferris insisted the next day in the small stone room where he kept his tools and his grief. "Not once. I'd swear it on her tomb." "Has anyone ever borrowed it?" Corwin asked. "Even for an hour, even for good reason?" Ferris opened his mouth to say no, and then he stopped and his old face changed, and I watched a memory he had never thought twice about turn slowly into a horror. "Once," he said, 2 years ago, near enough. A man came from the Queen Consort's household, with a written order sealed proper from the keeper of the household himself. Said the crypt seal was to be examined. That's the word, examined, because the master mason feared the old iron was wearing and the heron would blur, and they meant to cut a fresh one true to the old so the marks would always match down the centuries. A conservation, they called it, for the honor of the house. It seemed a fine thing, a careful thing. I gave the iron to the man for 3 days and he brought it back and I hung it on the hook and I never, his voice failed. They made a copy to reseal her with. They made it 2 years before they ever used it. They came to me and told me it was for her honor and I helped them. I gave them the very iron. "You gave it under a sealed order from the keeper of the household," Corwin said, and he said it gently because the old man's guilt was terrible to watch. "That's not your crime, Ferris, that's theirs, but it's a thread. Do you have the order still, the written one sealed?" Ferris did. Ferris was the kind of old servant who never threw away a piece of paper in his life. He dug it out of a chest of decades of crypt records, a single folded sheet, and Corwin unfolded it with the care of a man handling evidence, and read it, and went still. "It's signed by the keeper of the household," he said. "And the keeper of the household 2 years ago was a man named Osric Vale, who is now Ferris. Where is Osric Vale now?" "Dead, my lord," Ferris whispered. "Died a winter past, a fall from the west stair. They said he'd been drinking." Corwin and I looked at each other, and the same cold thought passed between us, and neither of us said it aloud before the weeping warden. A man who signs the order that copies the crypt seal, then dies of a fall from a stair, is not a coincidence. He is a loose end that has been tidied. Whoever had wound this thread had been willing, 2 years back, to tidy a keeper of the household to keep it wound, which told us 2 things: that the scheme was old and patient, and that the people who built it did not stop at graves. "We say nothing of Osric Vale yet," Corwin said quietly, folding the order back along its creases. "Not to anyone. If they killed a keeper to keep this quiet, then the moment they learn we've found the sealed order, we're the next loose ends. Highness needs this, but he needs it in a way that can't be turned back on us. We take it to him, and to no one else, and we keep our own count of who knows what. From now on, Sergeant," and he looked at me, and he was 24, and he was ordering a man twice his years, and I did not mind it in the least. "We assume the Queen Consort has eyes in every corridor, because she plainly has, and we behave as though every word we say in this palace is heard by her." "Agreed." "Agreed," I said. And I meant it, and it was not enough, because the very next day I made the smallest slip, and it nearly cost the best young man I ever served beside his life. Here is what I did. I asked a question, that was all. In the guardroom, tired off my guard, I asked Deverell, who had it from a footman, who had it from a maid of the Queen Consort's, whether he'd ever heard talk of the old keeper's fall from the west stair, whether anyone had thought it strange. I asked it low. I asked it careful. But I asked it in the palace, and the palace has ears, and I had broken my own new rule inside a day, because a tired man forgets his resolutions faster than he made them. That night, Corwin Ashvale was set upon on the river stair. He was coming off the late watch, alone in the dark, on the long stone stair that runs down from the water gate to the guards' quarters by the canal, a stair he knew like his own hands, having walked it 1,000 times, the same stone his lockmaster father had walked. 2 men were waiting for him in the black turn of it where the wall cuts off the moonlight. They wore no colors. They said no word. They came at him with the plain intent of men paid to make an accident. A young guard, tired, missed his footing on a wet stair in the dark. Such a shame. And the canal at the bottom to carry the question away. They had picked the wrong stair, and the wrong man's son. Corwin had grown up on canal stairs. He knew before he could have told you why, the small wrongness of a shadow that had weight, a breath where there should be none. And instead of climbing into it, he did the thing his father had drilled into him before he could read. At any doubt on a wet stair, get your back to the wall and your hand to the rail. He had his back to the stone, and his rifle unslung across his body before the first man reached him. And the first man, expecting a startled boy and finding a braced soldier, went past him down 3 steps of his own bad momentum, and cracked his shin on the rail hard enough that his curse was the first sound any of them made. The second man closed and grappled, going for the tumble, the fall, the accident, and found Corwin low and set and immovable as the stone he stood on, and the 2 of them strained in the dark for a long, ugly moment while the canal whispered below. I was not there. I have this from Corwin, told flat and short the way he told hard things, and from the man he took alive, who told it later at length and with a great deal more feeling. Corwin did not try to win the fight. 1 against 2 on a dark stair, he knew better. He tried only to not fall and to make noise, because noise on the river stair carries up to the water gate where a sentry stands, and 2 paid men in the dark would not stay to finish a job that had stopped being quiet. He got a boot behind one man's ankle, turned him into the rail, and shouted one great parade ground shout, "Guard on the stair," the cry we are all trained to make and pray we never need. And the sentry's lantern swung round above, and the first man cursed and hauled his shin-cracked partner up, and the 2 of them broke and ran up into the dark of the upper town. But the second man went down as he ran, tangled in his own bad ankle, and Corwin's split brow, one sleeve torn half off, a bruise coming up his ribs the color of a plum, did not chase the runner. He put his knee in the fallen man's back and held him for the sentry, because a chased man is lost and a held man can be questioned. Even at the bottom of a murder attempt with his own blood in his eye, Corwin Ashvale was still following the water back to where it shouldn't be. They brought me from my bed. I came down the river stair 2 steps at a time and found him sitting on the cold stone with the sentry's lantern on him and the prisoner face down and cursing beside him. And Corwin looked up at me with blood sheeting one side of his face and said, before I could say a word, before I could ask if he was whole, he said, "Sergeant, I'm sorry. Someone heard a question tonight that they shouldn't have." He was apologizing to me for nearly being murdered, because he had worked out, sitting there bleeding, that the attempt meant our question about Osric Vale's fall had been heard, and that the hearing of it had put him on that stair, and his very first thought, ahead of his own split skull, was that we had made a mistake and he was reporting it. I have known many brave men. I have known very few whose discipline reached all the way down into the marrow like that, so that even bleeding on a stair in the dark the man was still keeping an honest count. I did not tell him it was my slip, not then. I told him later when it mattered less and I could bear it, and he only shrugged with his bruised ribs and said a leak is a leak and the point is to stop it, not to hang a name on it, which was his father talking and which forgave me more completely than any speech could have. But that night I said only, "You're not sorry for anything. Hold still. You're bleeding into your eye." We took the prisoner to a cell the watch kept below the gatehouse, quiet and out of the main flow of the palace, and there, with Corwin's blood barely washed off and the crown prince fetched from his bed, we learned how deep the thread ran, and it ran deeper than even Rowan had feared. The man was a hired blade named Hask, a Rivertown tough who had done ugly work for ugly money half his life, and he was not at bottom brave. Brave men do not push tired boys downstairs for coin. Faced with a crown prince, a split-browed guard who had bested him, and the certain prospect of the rope, Hask decided the people who had hired him were a great deal further away, right now, than the rope was. He did not know the whole of it. Hired blades never do, that is the point of them. But he knew his own thread, and his own thread was gold. "A steward," he said, when Rowan promised him his life in exchange for the truth, whole and witnessed. "I never had a name off him, my lord. They never give you the name, but a steward, palace clothes, soft hands, a voice like he was always tasting something sour. He came to the anchor down in the river town 3 nights past. Said there was a guard asking questions he shouldn't, and questions cost, and would we like to earn. Said it had to look like a fall. Said the man was off the late watch and took the river stair alone and gave us the nights he'd be on it." Hask's eyes went sideways to Corwin. "Said he was just a boy, said it'd be easy." "This steward," Rowan said, very level, "whose colors?" "No colors, my lord, but he paid in old coin, heavy coin. The kind you don't see in the river town, and on the pouch." Hask stopped. He was, I think, only now understanding how high he had climbed and how badly a man could fall from it. "On the pouch, my lord, worked in the leather small, was a heron, a bird in reeds. I thought nothing of it. I swear I thought nothing of it. The heron, the sigil of the late Queen Isolde's mother's house, the mark on the locket, the mark on the crypt seal, and now, God help us, the mark on the purse that paid for the murder of the man who had found the locket, the murder that had been ordered plainly to bury the whole thing again. Except the heron was Isolde's, not the Queen Consort's. The Queen Consort's house was a different sigil entirely, a stag, if it matters. So why would the men doing Morwenna's dirty work pay from a purse marked with the dead rival's heron? Corwin, bruised and bleeding and sharper in that cell than any of us, was the one who saw it. "Because it isn't only theft, Highness," he said slowly. "Look at what she's done. She robbed the grave of the heron locket. She kept the heron. And now her men pay for murder from a heron-marked purse. If it ever came out, if a hired blade were ever caught exactly as this one has been, the trail wouldn't lead to a stag. It would lead to a heron, to your mother's house, to your mother's people. She wasn't only stealing the locket, Highness. She was building it so that if the theft ever surfaced, the blame would land on the late Queen's own household, on the last loyal servants of your mother's line, and not on her. He looked up, and even through the drying blood his eyes were clear and cold. She doesn't just take. She frames the dead woman's people for the taking. That's why it's patient. That's why it's clever. Every thread she leaves points at a heron. She spent 2 years making sure that if anyone ever pulled this loose, it would strangle the wrong house. The cell was silent, but for the drip of water somewhere in Hask's frightened breathing. My mother's people, Rowan said. His voice had gone to a place past anger. She robbed my mother, and she meant to hang my mother's servants for it. The old steward Marrow. Isolde's ladies, the people who loved her most, who'd have died for the locket, they were to be the thieves. He shut his eyes. It is not enough for her to have taken everything. She wants the ones who loved my mother to be remembered as her betrayers. She wants the good name buried deeper than the body. And that, I think, was the moment the Crown Prince of Eldermore stopped fighting to recover a locket and started fighting for the honor of the dead, which is a fight men will go much further in than any fight over gold, and which the Queen Consort, for all her cleverness, had not reckoned that she was starting. But cleverness does not lose to fury. It loses to proof, or it does not lose at all. And by the following morning it looked very much as though we would lose. Because in the night, while Corwin bled and Hask talked, the Queen Consort had not been idle. She never was. She moved always before you knew she had begun, and by the time the palace woke she had built, out of the very facts we thought were ours, a story that put the rope around our necks instead of hers. In the Queen Consort's telling, carried to the king's ear before ours could reach it, a plot had been uncovered against the crown. A hired blade named Hask had been captured on the river Stair. Under questioning, this Hask had confessed, yes, confessed. She never fought the facts that he had been paid from a purse marked with the heron of the late Queen's house. And who, she asked, weeping, still bore that heron? The last servants of the late Queen's household. The old steward Marrow. Isolde's grieving, sideline people, who had never accepted her, Morwenna, and who now, it seemed, had turned to hired blades, and who had invented this monstrous tale of a robbed grave to cloak their own treason and cast it upon her innocent son. Do you see it? She had taken every thread we pulled and restrung it into a noose for the wrong neck. The captured blade, hers, now proof of a heron plot. The heron purse, her own plant, now evidence against Isolde's house. The robbed grave recast as a lie invented by desperate traitors. Corwin reframed as their dupe. By noon the order came down. The guardsman Corwin Ashvale was relieved of his post and confined to quarters pending inquiry, and the old steward Marrow and 3 of the late Queen's surviving ladies were taken into custody on suspicion of conspiracy against the crown. The false dawn, the pacing men call it. The moment it all looks lost, except there was nothing false about how lost it looked. It looked lost because it very nearly was. I went to Corwin in his quarters, where a guard I knew stood at the door with an expression of deep unhappiness, because none of us liked it, none of us believed it, and none of us could do a thing. Corwin sat on his cot with his ribs bound and his brow stitched, and the morning's ruin settling over him, and he did not look beaten. That was the thing about him. He looked like a man working a stuck gate. "She's very good," he said when I came in. "You have to grant her that, Sergeant. I pulled every thread expecting them to lead to her. She'd already tied the far end of every one of them to a heron. I've spent 3 days finding proof, and every single piece of it she can point at Marrow's people instead of at herself." He shook his head slowly. "The captured blade points at a heron purse. The heron purse points at Isolde's house. The grave, she'll say we made it up, and how do we prove we didn't? Ferris's sealed order names Osric Vale, and Osric Vale is dead and can't say who told him to write it. Every thread." She thought of every thread. "Then it's over," I said, and I hated saying it. And I said it because a man has to look at the true shape of a thing before he can decide whether to keep fighting a lost one. No, Corwin looked up. It's not over because she made the mistake clever people always make. My father used to say it about men who build clever locks. He leaned forward, wincing at his ribs. She thought of every thread I might pull. She did not think of the one that can't be restrung because it isn't a story, it's a thing. He looked at me. Sergeant, where is the locket right now? With the crown prince in his keeping, sealed. And where is the coffin? I understood then, and the cold of it and the wonder of it went through me together. In the crypt, I said slowly. Still sealed, still closed. Still closed, Corwin said. Here is what she cannot restring because it isn't a rumor she can dress in new clothes. It's stone and bone and the truth. If the grave was robbed, and it was, you and I saw the reseal, then one of two things is inside that coffin. Either it's empty of the locket, or it holds a false one, a copy left in its place so that anyone who ever opened it would find a locket and think all was well. Either way, the coffin is proof no story can turn. If it's empty, the locket in the prince's hand is the true one, robbed from the grave, and no tale of heron traders explains how it reached Cassius's trunk with a nick on the rim. Only the real one has. And if there's a copy inside, then we hold the copy in one hand and the true locket in the other, and the whole realm sees a swap was made, and swaps aren't made by grieving servants of the dead. They're made by the one who wanted the true one and didn't care that a false one lay on the woman she'd replaced. He sat back. She built her whole defense on the idea that no one would ever dare open that coffin again. She's counting on our reverence, the king's grief, the fact that a decent man would rather lose than disturb his dead wife's rest a second time. She's wagered everything on the king's love for Isolde protecting her crime. His eyes were steady. And that's the one wager she's going to lose. Because the man who loved Isolde most is her son, and her son already knows the grave was opened. The only question left is whether Rowan loves his mother's peace more than her honor, and I stood in that crypt with him. I know the answer. He was right, but being right in a locked room is worth nothing, and the inquiry that would decide Marrow's fate and Corwin's was set for the third day. And by then the Queen Consort story would be the realm's story, hardening like her clever new mortar into something no one could crumble. We had one move. It was a terrible one, and it belonged to the crown prince alone, and I could not make it for him, and neither could Corwin. So we sent him the only message we could get past the door, 3 words, carried by the guard I trusted, folded small, the same 3 words he had once sent me, turned back on him now like a key returned to its maker. The blue solar. He came at dusk. He came alone, which a prince should never do, and he stood in his dead mother's cold sitting room with the locket in his hand, and he listened while Corwin laid it out through the half-open door of what could not be, the coffin, the proof no story could turn, the one wager the Queen Consort had made that could still be broken. And I watched Rowan's face while he heard the price of it, which was this: to save the honor of the dead, and to save Marrow and Isolde's loyal people and Corwin, he would have to do the one thing his whole grieving soul had sworn never to do. He would have to open his mother's grave a second time, in front of witnesses, with the king present and the court and the Queen Consort, so that no man could ever say it was done in secret and faked. He would have to lay his mother open to the eyes of the realm, to prove that another woman had already done it in the dark. She'll say I desecrated the grave, Rowan said quietly. The grieving son, unhinged, tearing at his own mother's rest to prop up a mad story. She'll turn even this. She'll try, Highness, Corwin said. But not if the king orders it. Not if you don't do it, he does. Not if it's done in full daylight with the crypt warden's testimony, with the sealed order Ferris kept, with the reseal I found there for every eye to see, and with the true locket held up beside whatever lies inside. She can turn a thing done in the dark. She cannot turn a thing done in the light before the king, that ends with 2 lockets in 2 hands and the mortar in that lower right corner younger than the rest. There's a moment, Highness, when a scheme has so many patches on it that the patches themselves are the proof. She's patched every thread. Make her stand in the crypt while the last patch tears, and the patches will hang her." He drew a breath. "But it has to be the king who orders it. And that means you have to make your father believe you before the inquiry, before her story sets, enough to open the grave. And I don't know how to do that, Highness. That's not a gate I know how to pick. That one's yours." Rowan looked at the locket in his hand for a long time. Then he closed it, and closed his fist around it. And when he looked up, the grief in his face had been folded away and put down somewhere, the way we are all taught to fold and put down the things that would unmake us on duty. "My father," he said, "does not believe schemes, he believes people. He has loved my stepmother for 11 years, and he cannot make his heart call her a thief, and no thread I bring him will change that, because he doesn't disbelieve the threads, he disbelieves that she could be at the end of them." He turned toward the dark window, toward the courtyard where 4 days ago a trunk had landed with the wrong sound. "But he loved my mother for 30. And there is one thing my father cannot bear, one thing that will move him when no evidence will, and it is the same thing that will move any decent man who ever loved a woman and lost her." He looked back at us. "The thought of her, alone in the dark, robbed, not the crime, the indignity. I will not go to my father with threads. I will go to him with the picture of her lying open in the crypt, while some paid man's hands took the last thing she owned off her body, and I will tell him that either we prove that never happened, or we prove that it did, and we give her back what was taken and lay her right, but that we do not, cannot, will not leave the question hanging over her rest for the rest of our lives to protect the peace of the woman who might have done it." His voice did not rise, but the room seemed to fill with it. "He will open the grave, not for the locket, for her. And when he does, Ashvale's proof will be waiting in the stone, and she will be standing there when it tears. I have served the crown for 30 years, and heard a great many royal speeches, most of them written by other men. That one was not written by anyone. It came up out of a son, and it was the best plan any of us had, and it was right." "When, Highness?" Corwin asked. "Tomorrow, before her story sets. I'll have you released to stand as witness. You found the reseal. The king will want it from your own mouth. Marrow and the lady stay held one more night. I can't free them without proving why, and the proof is in the crypt." He moved to the door, then stopped, his hand on the frame, and looked back at the young guard sitting bruised on the window seat of his dead mother's room. "Ashvale, if I am wrong about my father, if he cannot bear it and turns away and lets her story stand, then tomorrow ends you. You know that. The guard who tore open the Queen's grave for nothing. There is no post in the marsh far enough for that. It's the block or exile or worse. I know it, Highness. And you'll stand up in that crypt anyway and say what you saw." "I counted it true, Highness." Corwin met his eyes. "I'm not going to uncount it now because it got dangerous. That's not a gate. That's just a man deciding whether the count was ever real. It was real when I found it in the dark with no one watching. It's real now with the whole court watching. The watching doesn't change the stone." He almost smiled. "My father used to say the gate doesn't care who's looking. I've found that true of the truth as well." Rowan looked at him a long moment. Then he inclined his head, a prince, to a gate guard, a small grave bow of the kind kings give to men they have decided to remember, and went out into the dark to go and break his father's heart in order to save it. He broke it, and it held. That is the short of it. I was not in the room when the crown prince went to the king, and I would not tell you what passed between them if I had been, because some doors a man does not describe even to his sons. I know only what came out of it. That at first light, King Alaric, old and slow and prouder of his second marriage than of almost anything, and still, under all of it, a man who had loved Isolde for 30 years, gave the order that the crypt of the house of Harrogate be opened in the presence of the king, the crown prince, the Queen Consort, the warden of the watch, the crypt warden Ferris, the guardsman Corwin Ashvale, and such of the court as could stand witness, so that a question touching the honor of the dead might be answered in the light, and never asked in the dark again. The Queen Consort came. She could not refuse. Refusal was confession. And having watched her descend that long cold stair in her mourning gray, chin high, her son Cassius pale at her side, I nearly doubted us even then, because a guilty woman does not walk like that. She walked like a wronged one. She had built her own defense so well that she came down into that crypt as if to be vindicated, and the sight of her certainty put a cold finger on my spine. The court gathered in the low stone chamber. Torches were set. Ferris, weeping again, laid his sealed order, the 2-year-old paper that had loosed the crypt iron for conservation, into the king's own hands. And the king read it, and his old face moved, because the seal on it was the seal of his own dead keeper of the household, and the king had known Osric Vale, and had grieved his drunken fall from the west stair. Then Corwin was brought forward, bruised still, stitched still, in the plain uniform of the North Gate, to stand before the King of Eldermore and say what he had found. He did not perform it. He reported it, the way he had reported the trunk, flat and exact and merciless in its plainness. He knelt at the tomb before the whole court and set his lantern to the joint of the facing stone and walked the light around it inch by inch as he had that first night, narrating as he went, untouched, 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 and then he came to the lower right corner and he stopped and he said, "Here, Majesty, bring the light, this corner." The king himself bent to the stone, an old man on his knees in a crypt at the tomb of the wife of his youth, peering at a band of mortar. And Corwin touched the lighter, finer, newer mortar with his fingernail, and a crumb of it came away that should never have come away from 4-year work, and he held it up on his glove for the king to see. "This tomb was opened, Majesty," Corwin said quietly, "and sealed again. They matched the crypt's heron. They had the copy your keeper's order loose 2 years past, but they could not match the age of the mortar. This corner is younger than the rest by years. The stone cannot be restrung into any other story. It was opened, and I stand ready to be wrong, Majesty, gladly, joyfully wrong, if there is any other way this corner comes to be newer than its neighbors, but there is not. I have looked for one for 4 nights. There is not." The Queen Consort spoke then, and her voice was steady and full of sorrow, and she was, to the last, magnificent in her way. "A grave was robbed. How dreadful, how wicked! And you would have the king believe I am the robber, I, who helped lay this poor woman to her rest with my own hands. Some thief did this. Some servant of her own house, resentful, grasping, the very people your watch already holds. This proves a crime, guardsman. It does not prove a criminal. You have shown me a wound. You have not shown me a hand." And there it was, the last patch, the last restring, offered smooth and certain. And I felt the court begin to sway toward her, because she was right. A wound is not a hand, and doubt is the widow's oldest ally. "No, Majesty," Corwin said. "She's right. The stone shows a crime, not a criminal." He rose from his knees. "So let us not argue the hand. Let us open the coffin as the king has ordered and let the dead answer for herself. Because whoever opened this tomb either took the locket and left nothing, or left a false one in its place, to be found by anyone who ever looked, so that the theft would sleep undiscovered. 2 possibilities, Majesty, and I hold the true locket here." He did not. The prince held it and stepped forward now to raise it in the torchlight, the worn heron, the nick on the rim, and in a moment we will hold whatever the coffin holds. And I will make one prediction before the stone is moved, before God and the king and this whole court, so that no man may say I fitted my tale to the answer after. He turned to face the Queen Consort directly, for the first time, and his voice did not rise and it did not shake. "The coffin holds a copy, a false locket. Because a thief who only wanted gold would have left the grave empty, and no one the wiser for years. But someone who wanted the true heron locket out of the world, and wanted the late queen's own household blamed if it ever surfaced, would leave a false one behind, so the grave would seem untouched, so the theft would seem impossible, so that the very fact of a locket in this coffin would one day be used to call an honest man a liar." He let that sit. If the coffin is empty, Majesty, I am half wrong and it is only theft. But if there is a false locket inside, a fresh one, sharp engraved, unworn, with no nick on its rim, then it was not gold that was wanted here. It was your first wife's honor, and the honor of everyone who loved her. And no grieving servant of the dead plants a false locket in a grave to frame themselves. The king rose slowly to his feet. He looked at his son, who held the worn locket high. He looked at Ferris's sealed order in his own hand. He looked, for a long and terrible moment, at his wife. And then, in a voice gone hollow with a grief 4 years buried and freshly opened, King Alaric said, "Open it." They moved the facing stone. They drew the coffin partway into the torchlight, no further. The king would allow no further, and no man there wished it, and Ferris, with hands that shook so that the warden had to steady him, reached in through the place where the reseal had been, into the dark, to the still breast of the late Queen Isolde, and drew out his hand, and opened it into the torchlight before the king and the court and the Queen Consort. A locket lay on his palm, gold, oval, a heron in reeds. Sharp engraved, unworn, no nick on the rim. A copy. The crypt was so silent I could hear the torches breathe. And into that silence, the crown prince stepped forward and laid the true locket beside the false one on the old warden's trembling palm, and every soul who could see leaned to look. And the difference was the difference between a thing loved for 300 years and a thing made in a back room last season. One worn smooth and nicked and human, one crisp and cold and false. And no story, no restringing, no widow's sorrow could stand against those two lockets lying side by side in the light. The Queen Consort did not cry out. She did not swoon. She was, I will grant her to the end, made of colder and harder stuff than that. She looked at the two lockets on the old man's palm, and I watched her understand that the last patch had torn, and that she was standing in the light she had wagered no one would ever dare to bring, and that the king her husband was looking at her now not as a wife, but as the thing that had left a false locket on the breast of the woman he had loved for 30 years, so that the world would think that woman still slept whole. "Alaric," she began, "Alaric, listen to me." But the king had turned away from her. He had turned to the false locket in the warden's hand, and he reached out and took it, and he held it cheap, crisp, new, and something in the old man broke and did not fold away, because he was the king and there was no post to fold it away for, no duty to hold it down for, only a husband and 2 lockets and the truth. And he said, not loudly, to the crypt, to his son, to the dead. She was not left whole. And that was the end of the Queen Consort. Not a shout, not a struggle, just a king holding a false locket, unable to look at his wife. The rest was law, and the law moved as it should have from the first, slowly, thoroughly, without mercy but also without haste. The warden of the watch took the Queen Consort into custody there in the crypt, courteously, as Rowan had once ordered Cassius held, for the crown does not brawl with its own even in disgrace, pending the king's justice. Lord Cassius was held with her. Hask's testimony, the heron purse, Ferris's sealed order, the 2-shade mortar, and the 2 lockets side by side made a case no cleverness could restring, because at the bottom of all of it now sat a thing, not a story, a false locket in a coffin, and things do not turn. The old steward Marrow and the late Queen's 3 ladies were freed that same hour, and the king himself, they say, went to them and asked their pardon for the night they had spent in a cell, suspected of the very crime committed against the mistress they had loved. And when Marrow, weeping, tried to kneel, the king would not let him and held him up by the arms. I was not there to see it, but I believe it, because after that day King Alaric was a changed man, slower and sadder, and somehow more truly a king than in the years of his comfortable blindness. They laid Isolde whole again. That was Rowan's doing, and it was done quietly, with only the family and the crypt warden and, at the crown prince's own request, the guardsman Corwin Ashvale, because, Rowan said, the man who found her robbed should be the man who sees her made right. The true locket, the worn one, the nicked one, the one that had gone from her breast to a dark stair to a trunk to a prince's fist and back, was laid once more upon her, and this time the king himself sealed the stone, and this time Ferris wept for a better reason. I asked Corwin long after what it had been like to stand in that crypt at the end. He thought about it in his slow way, and then he said, "It was like closing a gate that had been left open 4 years. You don't feel triumph, Sergeant. You feel the click of it. The count comes right, and the thing that was open is shut, and that's all. That's the whole of it. The count came right." That was Corwin. He did not stay a gate guard. The crown prince, who not long after became more than crown prince, for old King Alaric's quieter reign did not run many more years, would not hear of it. But it was not a reward Corwin wanted, nor one Rowan gave. What Rowan did was make him warden of the household count, a post half invented for him, whose whole duty was the thing Corwin had always done, to keep the honest count of what belonged to the crown, at every gate and threshold, answerable to no lord and no lady, but only to the old order in the old ledger. "The one man in my house," Rowan said, at the giving of it, "who kept the count on the morning it mattered, when every other man in the court would have found a reason not to. There will always be someone with a heavy trunk and a good title and a reason for you to look away. You did not look away. I am making it your life's work never to look away, and I am making it so that no lord in this realm can ever again make a guard of mine afraid to lift a lid." I stood the colonnade that day too, third from the end, and watched a river lockmaster's son take a warden's chain from the hand of the man who was nearly king, and I thought of the morning it began, the trunk that landed with the wrong sound, the smile that was the second wrong thing, the small gold gleam in a white glove, and I understood that the whole vast machinery of it, the crypt and the king and the fall of a Queen Consort, had turned on the narrowest thing in the world. Not a sword, not a secret. A man who, asked to look away from a trunk that was too heavy for what a lord claimed it held, simply would not. They still tell it in the guardroom, though it has grown in the telling the way true things do, and the young ones always wanted to start with the locket. But I started where it started, because I was there, and because I have 3 sons and I want them to understand the shape of it before the shine gets on it. It started with weight, a strap of oxblood leather biting into a porter's shoulder, a count a young man would not fake, and a gate that was only ever as honest as the man who kept it, which, on the one morning in 4 years it needed to be, it was.